an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Deadwood, Season 3, Episode 11, The Catbird Seat. In this episode, Natasha is mad at this show. It has taken away somebody that she loves very much, and nothing will ever make it right, ever, ever, ever. Killing Hearst will never make it right. Nothing can make it right. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Many thanks again to Patrick for commissioning these episodes. The next episode, which is Friday, is going to be the very last one of the series, and then I am going on my vacation, but I'm going to watch the movie, of course, that comes out, and I will be covering that when I return. So you all have to wait a little bit for my coverage of that, but I think that it'll be really cool to be able to cover that right around when so many other people are getting to watch it for the first time, versus now where I'm covering Deadwood years and years too late for anybody to, not for anybody to care, but for anybody, like, most people have seen the show already who are going to watch it, I fancy. So, alright guys, this fucking episode, man, I cannot emphasize enough how caught off guard I was. Like, there are a lot of shows out there that can surprise me with the death of a character simply because of how sudden it is, and that's it. And it's not even like I miss the character necessarily, and maybe I do, but it's just oftentimes the actual shock value of the moment itself, or the shock of the actions of the people in the episode, because I didn't expect them to be ready to kill somebody. And this is the first time, I think, and I'm starting to get a better sense of what it's like for Game of Thrones viewers who have not read the books. This is the first time that a character that I have come to truly love, like really, this is the first time that I have had that character die. Almost always the characters that I truly love make it to the end. And it's been 100% a surprise. I was blindsided. Blindsided. Like, I was sitting there watching this episode, and the shot rings out, and I had looked away from the TV for like a moment, and when I looked back, it was so clear what had happened, but I was so unwilling to accept it that I like rewound it and watched it again, because I just could not believe what was happening. In retrospect, it makes total sense, and I should have seen it coming from the way that Hearst was talking to that Pinkerton guy. And it also makes sense after Hearst lost his Pinkerton connect, the like guy who was in charge. It makes sense that he's going to up the ante and actually kill somebody too, instead of just doing the like thing that he did with Alma, which is basically like, you know, faking, doing a sort of prod and, what's the word when you're trying to, provoke? It's not just a provocation. I should have known that he would up the ante, but I just didn't really think it through. And if I had been thinking about who he would go against, it wouldn't have occurred to me that he'd go after Ellsworth. It should. Because the whole thing here is that he wants Alma's claim. And what better way to destabilize her and make her willing to sell than to kill her husband and the man in charge of overseeing her claim? Somebody who she knew she could trust implicitly and who she will likely not be able to replace, and somebody who was close to her emotionally. It's a pretty smart move, to be honest. And also, Ellsworth was a huge dick to him. And I say dick with like an asterisk because obviously Hearst deserved every single word of what Ellsworth was saying. But it probably was kind of like fun for Hearst to pick Ellsworth for that as well. Like, quite apart from the tactical sense of choosing somebody in that position, he probably dislikes Ellsworth personally. And so in that regard, I bet it was like kind of a nice moment of satisfaction for him. But it comes at such a sudden, the moment, it is just really abrupt, and it happens in the middle of him monologuing to his dog. And I can't emphasize enough how sad it is for me to see him collapse in front of his dog. But it comes in this moment as he's talking about how sorry he is of everything that Sophia has gone through, that she's already seen all of these people die and be like cut into pieces, her family, that maybe she's worried about them having to guard the schoolhouse because she is already traumatized from that attack and maybe is like worried about what this could mean for the rest of the camp. It's just a really empathetic moment where he is so putting himself in Sophia's shoes and trying to understand what could possibly like make her feel better and how she's thinking right now and what she's gone through. It is peak Ellsworth. And he's talking about how, well, maybe I don't know if me leaving was the right thing to do. Maybe I should go back. Like, he's considering that maybe taking off because of Alma using again was the wrong decision, and considering what's best for Sophia. The whole thing is so him. And he's in the middle of this and feeding this little dog. And the dog whimpers just as somebody opens the friggin' flap and shoots him. Ellsworth looks at this guy like there's almost a bit of resignation in his face when he sees this dude pointing the gun at him. It's like he knew this was coming and he's almost surprised it didn't happen sooner, and finally here it is. It's a perfect character moment, and it makes me so sad. Guys, I can't emphasize enough. It happens about 15 minutes into the episode, so I'm going to back up a little bit, but I had to talk about that off the gate because that's just so huge. I'm just so bummed. All right, so let's go back to the beginning of the episode where everybody is standing around in silence, apparently trying to figure out what is going on. There's a variety of ways that this... Oh, man. Did you hear that? Part of my word was lost. I'm going to keep going. There's a variety of ways in which this is playing out. We have Seth and his people at the hardware store staring at each other and pacing around. We have Cy with Janine, who he has decided to call stupid. I hate Cy so much. I know I hate Hearst more. I definitely do. But I just want you all to know that my hatred for Cy burns hot and high, just as it used to. It's simply taking a back seat to somebody who causes more outright trouble. Cy is just so much more fucking petty. Hearst is a genuine fucking problem. But Cy is like, I don't even want to call him like a schoolyard bully because that isn't like, it's, I guess it kind of is though. But yeah, he's like a schoolyard bully versus like an abusive teacher or something, you know. He's the Draco Malfoy versus Umbridge, I guess. So he's a tool of Umbridge at times, but he thinks he's a lot more valuable than he actually is and can be sidelined at any moment because Umbridge wants to do something else. And Leon comes in and is like reporting to him about everybody's movements because it is dead fucking quiet out there. And apparently the thing is that they're deciding whether or not Seth should stay in town because he winds up going back to Sturgis. It's Sturgis, right? Is the name of the town. Again, and being called away yet again. But yeah, there's definitely this moment of like, irritation on Al's part because he hasn't been called over and he sees them standing and walking around and staring at each other. And we know that they're not even talking. But to Al, he feels like he's been excluded. And I want to mention, and this is something that personally bummed me out, even though it's the very least of the shit that has been said in these episodes in terms of insults and, you know, things that are straight up offensive. Like there's plenty of shit that is racial and sexist and whatever. It's totally like not up in that echelon at all. But as a fellow fat chick, 2 fat prostitutes in this episode are like specifically made fun of for being fat. And I felt so sad for them. I just always think about what it must be like as an actor. It's not like, you know, I understand that you go into the scene knowing this, but what it must be like to be made fun of in a scene for something that is genuinely true about you and you can't change. It's not like somebody put makeup on to make themselves look ugly and they're being made fun of for being ugly when we all know they're not. This is their weight, something that does not change immediately unless they decide to do something. And it's not, you know, it's makes me, I've always sort of thought of it in the same way that I've thought of like people who have to put up with racial slurs in scenes when they are actually that race, you know, like it's the kind of thing that I just wonder what it must be like to be on the receiving end of that, even though it's a scene and you know it's not real and whatever. It must be hard, you know, there must be a part of you that has to shut off what you're hearing or something. I don't know how you cope with it. But yeah, Al is watching, and it's kind of funny to me too, because Al has chosen this girl, Dolly is this prostitute's name, and he has chosen her after having Trixie as his favorite, and they just could not be more different. Like Trixie is so thin and blonde and older, and Dolly is young and fat and curly haired and dark, and like the whole thing is just so funny to me that there's no apparent taste to either of like that I can detect. I don't know what it is that makes him choose who he chooses. So Al decides finally to get dressed and storm over there. And on the way, Merrick stops him and wants him to take a look at the paper that he has printed. It's a temporary article that he's writing about what happened to Alma, that he wants to get Al's approval on before he goes ahead and actually prints it. And poor Merrick is still dealing with his broken ribs and everything. It is kind of a bummer to see how he's hobbling around. Poor guy. I just really admire Merrick, though, because he isn't backing down, you know? He's still going to write this fucking article and try and kind of get to Hearst in the way that he can, even though getting to Hearst in the way that he can is exactly what got him into this situation in the first place. I want to mention really quickly the weirdness of what's going on with Jack and Shaughnessy. Shaughnessy owns the other hotel, I guess, or boarding house. I'm not really sure what the difference is between those two things. I'm going to say hotel. Jack is out in the street looking up at the window of the girl that's apparently going to be moving into the theater. And Shaughnessy is really like irritated at him hovering around and wants to know what the fuck he wants, basically. And I have to be honest with you guys, I don't understand what I'm supposed to feel about Shaughnessy. Like, he is such a nothing character he jumps out as being a bit of a joke every now and then. But I feel like I'm supposed to know more about him than I do. And he appeared so suddenly and without any warning at the beginning of this season, because that's where Joni was staying. And like, I didn't know he existed. And then all of a sudden there's a whole other hotel that Joni's staying at. And it's really weird to me that he's being like given as much time as he is. I don't really get it. He's over here like trying to say that Jack shouldn't disturb him because he's at his prayers. And finally he yells at Jack, "Fuck yourself." And Jack yells at him, "Fuck you, sir." But he like looks so indignant before he yells all of it. Like, the whole thing is played in such a way that I feel like I'm supposed to know more than I do, if that makes sense. It's played in a similar way, to be honest, as the story with the theater people, where I feel like they're starting something that they want to go somewhere. And yet Shaughnessy the theater people, it's felt like gradually every episode, we've gotten a little bit deeper into their, relationships and what's going on. We don't know them well. It's not like we really get the backstory by now even, but we know them better. But Shaughnessy, it's like there's been no advancement made. So I'm not totally getting it. And as far as the theater people, I'm just going to go over that really quick this episode. I told you guys about the information that Patrick sent me about how, what's her name? It starts with a D. Well, whatever her name is, she is supposed to be Jack's daughter, and she is unaware of the fact. And she's drawn to him and thinks it's sexual because she can't really figure out what else it could be. But it seems like the people around her are aware that she's his daughter. Like the woman here that is the older woman that she's going to talk about it to him, or to talk about him to. This woman seems to have a look of worry and concern on her face. Like, she is aware this girl is his daughter and doesn't really know how to handle talking to this woman about it, because she doesn't want to betray his confidence and out him. But also this girl's tearing herself up over it and about to leave the troop over it. And she knows that Jack doesn't quite fathom how bad the problem is. So that's basically practically everything that goes on with them is her being at her wit's end about how Jack doesn't see her, how this other brunette has been installed at the theater, and how she's jealous and he doesn't she calls him cruel and brazen. And this woman is like, well, just because we know what's going on doesn't mean he's brazen. We just know what it is. And she's obviously like, you're either on my side or you're on his side. So if you're not going to agree with me, you're on his side. And it's a sad scene because, knowing what we know, she's cutting herself up over something that is just so wrong. And it's just so wrong. But it doesn't, there's one episode left, and I don't anticipate this is going to materialize into anything, so I'm just going to leave that there. So Mr. Swearingen gets a message from a telegraph from Mr. Blazanoff. And it is a message from Hawkeye, whom Al decided he was going to trust because of Silas, even though he does not like Hawkeye. It's kind of amusing to me how much Al hates Hawkeye, considering that I really don't understand why he hates him like that. Hawkeye seemed like a bit of a shit, yes, but Al really hates the guy. And this moment, he doesn't even really have hard evidence that Hawkeye has screwed them over. He has his suspicions. He says, 23 men hired, all on our way. And says, in 8 words, it proves he's incompetent and a fucking liar. He can't have got Adam's telegram more than 4 hours ago. Yet he expects me to believe that in 4 hours, he can prudently assess the qualities of 23 hires. And you know what on our way means? And Blazanov says no, and attracts Al's attention, who gets up in his face. On our way means they're getting drunk and blown in some saloon in Cheyenne and running their mouths about this big fucking filibustering expedition they're being commissioned for. And basically he says they're basically blowing up my spot. And he's yelling this, and Blazanov puts his hands up and just says, please do not strike me. And I love the look that Al gets on his face. Like, he's really startled that Blazanov would, like, be worried about that, because he hasn't, I don't think, realized how aggressive he's coming off. It's a pretty amusing little moment, though. I love Blazanov. I liked him right away when he showed up, and that has not diminished at all. I've just grown more fond of him. He's standing up for things and just has as much backbone as anybody. And considering that he's like really alone in the camp when he arrives, the fact that he has the friends that he does already, I think speaks very well of him. And I like the fact that he is so direct about things like that, to just be like, please do not strike me. That's a pretty good, like it's just enough to sort of disarm Al and make him go, wait, what? Oh, yeah, okay, I'll calm down, sorry. And we go from that to EB monologuing. Now, I had completely missed talking about this last episode, and I really must amend this. Last episode, EB is approached by Hearst, who is just doing the thing that he does, which is intimidating people for the sake of it. I don't know how many of you have seen season 3 of Sherlock, but there is a character in that season who is not exactly evil in that he has a particular goal in mind that is bad. But he's evil in that he likes to prove the power that he has over folks by doing annoying things and watching as people let him do them because they know he has information on them to blackmail them with. So basically, the most material example is he goes up at one point to a character and just flicks them in the eye. Flicks them. And he has access to something that could kill one of that person's family members. And he's like, you have to let me. You have to let me keep on flicking you in the eye or I'll kill them. And it's just the fun of it for him, of being able to make somebody endure something that is really humiliating and dehumanizing, and they being completely powerless to stop him. And that is completely what's happening here. Fucking Hearst had gone up to EB in the previous episode, spat on his face, and told him basically, you better not wipe that off, because when I come back by the end of the day, if I see it's gone, I'm going to kill you. Essentially is what he says. And this is the sort of threat that, while I don't think he would really kill him, I think it's 100% going to slip his mind immediately that he did this. It's understandable why EB takes him at his word and just leaves it, because Hearst is a fucking crazy person. So this scene starts off, and EB is saying to himself that it's understandable why I haven't wiped it off. And the camera really zooms in on his cheek and his nose where the spit dried up, and he has just left it there on his face. But he is in the middle of saying, I don't think anybody would blame me for leaving it. And then he stops and thinks to himself, surely this is not the culminating indignity. There remains, for example, receiving his regurgitations or swallowing his feces. And that is the key. EB is being kind of smart about this for once. This is not going to end here, guy. This is a man who loves to humiliate. He is not going to settle for just this. Once he realizes that you will do this, he will do something even worse and make sure that you take that too. It is 100% him seeing what you'll put up with. So he finally asks himself, would I stand for that? Like, where do I draw the line? And he finally pulls out his handkerchief and says, I am going to fuck you up. And I have to say, I loved it so much. And he says, and I'm the kind of cunt you'll let close. You know what, EB? I don't anticipate Hearst is going to die. Especially after how things just went down with Trixie, which we will talk about. But EB is certainly the person that Hearst is going to view as the least threat. The only person I could see Hearst thinking of as less of a threat is like Richardson. Maybe Aunt Lou. I would love it if Aunt Lou would just poison him. Oh, it would be so good. I really don't blame her for not, because it'd basically be a suicide. You know, if she did that, they'd know it was her and they'd kill her. Or even if she wasn't the one who did it and he died of poisoning, they'd assume it was her and they'd kill her. But goddamn, I really felt it in my bones when EB decided that he was going to not put up with this shit anymore. So out in the street, EB meets up with Al and basically declares, you know, he's just like, I am going to be here. Al doesn't know exactly what happened. I kind of wish EB explained it to him, but there isn't really a complete need for that either. Because I feel like it's sort of, you can see it on his face that something has sort of changed and shifted for him. There is a pretty cute moment. I'm watching this right now where one of the whores is like leaning over the banister, like looking down, and she turns around and Blazanov was staring at her and he like runs off. Oh, Blazanov. So Al heads over to the oh my God, hardware shop. And this is where he meets EB in the street, and he meets Jack also. And he says that he's going to go inside and find out what the fuck is going on. It's really funny because in the background, Harry Manning, who has been going back and forth with Seth for the campaign speeches, is on his horse, apparently like just waiting to turn around and head back to Sturgis. And he farts himself awake and wakes up like really like embarrassed and then almost immediately falls back asleep again. Bless him. Falling asleep on a horse, I feel like has to be really, really tough. But this is when this dude who winds up killing Ellsworth sails in. So we get to see him for the first time. So Al comes in, a meeting of the upper fucking crust exclusively. No hoi polloi need apply. Seth says, I ought to have called you. What events in the camp would argue I be called back from Sturgis is what we are trying to decide. And this moment is so cute because I, again, want to remind you all how different their relationship was in season 1 and how far things have come, that Al seeing them all gathered together when they like they're always together. There's no real reason for him to think of this as being like particularly significant, but he needs to be there. Like, this is just how things work now, that they are always in cahoots. And it just shows how much things have changed. And Jack Langrish is now getting involved in this as well, which we see a little bit later. He gets, what's the word I want? Menaced, I suppose, by Hearst back at the hotel in a later scene. And, you know, he had been trying to play both sides of things, but he does not do that effectively. And it's too late now. Like, he has inadvertently declared a side, and there is no way that Hearst is letting him near him ever again. I had kind of been surprised that Hearst let him near in the first place, and now with everything that's happened, that's really over. So, yeah. We go to Hearst talking to the fucking dude saying, you showed good judgment in keeping everything to yourself. Please don't tell anybody in the camp that all of your people have arrived. And then tells him the first person that I want killed is in this tent, hinting very heavily to what is going to happen that I fucking should have seen coming. But I didn't, because I don't want to see it, you know, frankly. So we go back to the meeting. Saul is saying, we'll be generally vigilant and under very specific circumstances we'll wire you to make early return. Seth says, yes, that's exactly it. And those would be... And he sort of stares, and Saul just stares back at him like, I was waiting for you to tell me, but I guess you're just going to stare at me. There's something very funny about this scene, about how it feels like Seth doesn't really want to, like, declare himself or make the rules, even though that's, like, his job at this point. Finally, he says, any further shooting out of the ordinary, like at Mrs. Ellsworth, Hearst-initiated horseshit of any sort, intimidation or the like, if it looks to eventuate in immediate violence. And when Saul says, if it looks to eventuate in immediate violence, everyone sort of stops and looks at him like they're not really sure what that means. And he defends himself and says, otherwise, why even try to make it to Sturgis for the speeches? And Trixie, very correctly, says, you don't want to be called back for Hearst-initiated bullshit. But what he's saying is that Hearst-initiated bullshit is inevitable at this point. We have to know that's coming. So we're not going to call you back for that, because then why leave in the first place? And once she points that out, everybody's sort of like, oh, okay, yeah, okay, that makes sense. And Jack says something about how Seth is the camp's irreplaceable man, to which, again, Trixie chimes in with, yeah, he really already knows that. He really, really knows that. Oh, I love Trixie so much. She doesn't do well in this episode. Like, I get why she did what she did, but it was not a smart move. At the same time, like, I kind of love it anyway, because nothing they do is going to work. And he's so angry already that as much as she's probably angered him further by doing what she decided to do, there's something really, like, satisfying in a petty way about her going about it and doing it. Even, like, it's just, if there comes a point where it's just like, fuck it. You know, I feel like we're rapidly approaching that point where you just kind of have to be like, fuck it. I'm sick of this. And on the one hand, well, all right, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll talk about that when we get there. There's a beautiful little moment where Jack and EB are each bowing to the other to go out the door, which is just so funny. And EB continues bowing as he goes out, like he's fucking like a hunchback or something. There's some, I love that so much. EB and Jack together, that could be real fun. I need more of that, to be honest. So then we get the scene with the theater girls talking, and then we get fucking poor Ellsworth being shot. And then we jump. I just, like, him being shot is just such a fucking bummer. Ugh. I hate it. I hate it so much. It's so, like, he just deserves so much better. To be killed in the heat of battle or protecting somebody, that'd be one thing. But to just be shot like that, sitting, doing nothing. And you know what kills me too? Is last episode, he asked Alma if he could go out there and guard her when she walked back to the bank. And we know that she winds up getting there, and it's perfectly fine in the end. But he talks about how he would like to be able to defend her if something happens. And she's like, I'm sure that would be lovely, but more than anything, I would like for you to have dinner with us later tonight. And he opts to not walk with her because she asks him to in order to protect him. And the fact that he could have gone with her and maybe started some shit, and yes, maybe died, but maybe have taken out some people at the same time, rather than just being a sitting duck in a tent, it's super frustrating. And not that I think that they should have made a different choice, because I understand why Alma was like, absolutely not. I don't disagree with her judgment on that. But it does feel like so much is sort of, it's just, they had no idea. You know, I think that's really what it is that they just, all of us were in the fucking dark about what Hearst was going to be willing to do. And it's hard to look back and realize that, like, Ellsworth, if he had known, he would have chosen to go out very differently. You know, even if he couldn't prevent his death, he would have chosen a different death. So, all right, we go to the next morning. Or no, not the next morning, because it is in the morning that he gets shot in the first place. And everybody is hanging out at the gym. Al is reading his paper, and fucking Merrick is standing there staring at him while he reads, trying to get him to tell him what he thinks of the article. And really with quite a bit of, like, foresight, Al says something about how, I like the article, I think you did an effective job pissing him off, but I'm wakeful wondering who he's likely to shoot at next. And I'm like, oh, if only you knew, buddy. You will in a second. And Merrick asks, who do you think he might shoot at? And everybody around him is like, Merrick, can you fucking not? Because they know how irritated Al gets when he keeps getting interrupted while reading his paper. But Merrick just can't fucking help himself. Bless his heart. And I love Silas staring at him at one point like, dude, no. And finally Al gets up and, yelling and whatever, fucking just doing his usual thing. He yells again about Hawkeye and the bullshit surrounding that. And Silas knows that this wouldn't have been brought up right now if Merrick had not pushed his buttons. And Al storms into his office and he looks at Merrick, Silas does, and says, couldn't let him read his fucking paper. And Merrick is just completely like unrepentant. He just sort of like does that like that white guy fake smile, that like flat mouth thing, but doesn't seem to like regret it at all. Because why would he? Because Merrick, just bless him. I really enjoy Merrick. I found out recently that the actor who plays Merrick was like put in prison for child porn or something. And I can't tell you what a bummer that is to find out, because he is so great in this show and he's also so great in Amadeus. And those are the two main things I know him from. I believe he was also in Ferris Bueller as the principal, which is such a weird turn. But yeah, I just had to share with you all that little bit of trivia because I can't be the only one who knows that. So we cut here to Sturgis and Seth sitting here reading his speech over as everybody files in. Apparently, I don't think they're starting the actual voting yet, but they're all picking up like these like buttons by the door that have a number affixed to them. They're like ribbons. I'm not really sure how the voting works here or what those signify. But this scene, like, there's a guy that Seth is talking to Harry, and he is, for some reason, obsessing over this woman that had been standing near him. And Seth is starting to get real irritated with him. And I don't understand what's going on here, because he keeps talking about how, like, I'm going to read this to you because I won't be lingering once we've finished. If you want to stay in politics, you'll have to ride back alone. I hate what happened in your home. Seth says, it's all right. Your wife good enough to ask me in for breakfast. That lovely woman putting her hand behind her for support when I feared she might fall to the floor. And then, even if only briefly, to have failed to acknowledge it had been my wind. What? Is he just saying that he farted and she doesn't say anything about it and how much he appreciates that? Is that all it is? What a weird, like, this thing is so weird. And there's a guy who's poking his head in and sort of staring at Seth. I do not understand why he's so irritated here. But this dude was in Heroes, and he was also in something else. Once Upon a Time. That's what I am recognizing him from. He's been in a bunch of stuff. And I don't know what it is about him that gets under Seth's skin, but Seth starts to like try and pick a fight with this guy. And I don't, like, Seth, dude, you need to calm the fuck down. He is so wound up. And I guess he assumes that this is like one of the spies for fucking Hearst. But it's just a weird moment of him, like, if he's gonna be spying, let him fucking spy and just don't say anything of significance in front of him. Just calm down. It's not a big deal. Apparently it is a big deal. So this is the moment where he gets pulled away to speak, and we cut to Alma, who is crying hysterically and running down the street. And for a moment, I was like, what's going on? And then I realized that she has found out what happened to him. It's a really weird POV shot that I didn't understand quite as soon as I should have. We're looking at Alma from the perspective of Ellsworth. His body in the back of the cart with his head propped up. We're looking at her the way that he would if he were still alive. So when she gets a look at his face and runs off, like for a second, I didn't understand what she was seeing. But she runs off and goes and gets Charlie Utter. But then the carriage or the cart continues to roll past with that perspective still in place. And we continue with that perspective a couple of times, seeing the reaction of all of these different people throughout the camp, finally seeing his body for the first time, including Hurst, who seems very satisfied with the fucking, the reaction that he's getting from everybody. This is when Hurst comes out into the hallway as Jack is opening his door. And Hurst stands there and stares at Jack as he tries to open his door. And Jack is trying to be his usual affable self, but Hurst stands perfectly still and just glares at him. And Jack runs into his room, basically. Like, this is the first time I think that we've seen Jack's charm fail him, but it's never seemed to ruffle him that it has failed. He's always sort of taken it in stride that, well, everybody's not going to like me. It's not always going to work. This is the first time I think that we have seen Jack be really shook, especially by Hurst, because he has been on decent terms with him. And the way that he closes the door behind him and leaves and leans up against it as if to like prevent Hurst from following him in, like he's a little worried. That's a moment, you know. I just really enjoyed the change that has come over Jack, because he looks scared in a way that just makes me scared, because it's such a rare expression for his face. So this is when Al comes storming out, says Hurst let his dogs loose. Davy, get to the Russian, tell him to wire Sturgis, to a wire Bullock as agreed. And Alma gets rushed inside saying, I want my child. And Charlie says, I'll go get her now. She gets handed over to Al. And it's just her acting in this moment. I cannot emphasize enough how impressed I am. She is so good in this show, period. But this particular moment of absolute hysteria, it's so well done. And her saying, what did I do to him? Of course she would feel that way. Like, basically, this guy got killed because he was in the way of getting her claim. It is 100% not her fault, I would like to add, but it makes total sense. That's how her mind works here. And what did I do to that poor man? And Al says, you didn't fucking shoot him. Don't be going off into fucking hysterics, huh? And the way he says it, but he looks at her with a kind face. Like, he says it and she hears him. This is not a man just being like, oh, hysterical women. He's like, listen, I get it, but you can't right now, okay? Let's go upstairs. We're going to get you a drink. We're going to calm this down. I love how he handles it and her reaction. And she goes over and holds his arm and he leads her upstairs. And she is just in this sort of like fog of shock. Meanwhile, fucking Jewel sticks her head out and says, I'm going to make her breakfast. Which, Jewel, bless your fucking heart, this bitch is not going to want breakfast. Are you high? But that's all Jewel knows how to do to relate to this lady. So it makes sense. And then we have the beginning of Trixie seeing and deciding to do what she decides to do. She sees Ellsworth roll on past her, blood pouring out of his head onto the back of the wagon. You see Cy even noticing and like looking really shook. Like, I need Cy to fucking man up or something, but he doesn't look like that's ever going to happen. And he like turns around and starts to like get into it with everybody, all of the whores, and what's his face? Not Nuttall. I always want to call him Nuttall. Stapleton, Con. And we'll see the results of that a little bit later. But this is when Trixie just takes it upon herself. She has that gun that she has on her. She opens her top so that her tits are just out. And she's walking straight up to Hurst's room with her top open. And she goes up there, knocks on his door, holds her skirts up so that her pussy is exposed also. She wants to make sure that he is full on distracted, and it seems to work. And then she shoots him. She shoots him in the shoulder rather than in the heart. She's hoping, I assume, that being bare-breasted and having her skirt up is going to make him so distracted that he won't actually be able to remember who shot him. I am not confident that worked. It looks like after she shoots him, he glares at her face before he slams the door shut. But I have to say that this bit is beautiful. As much as it bums me out that she didn't kill him, also, if she had killed him, that would have caused a whole other bunch of trouble. So I don't even really wish she had. I just love that somebody decided to do this to him. I just love that on its own. So I don't have a ton of time left because I talked a lot about Ellsworth being killed and how all of this worked. But there is a weird scene where the doc is digging the bullet out of Hurst's shoulder. And Hurst is talking about how people are going to think it's me who shot Ellsworth because people always think that if something benefits me, that it must have been me that did it. And he's in the middle of this when the doc finally finishes digging it out and is about to just be like, well, gotta go and work on some other people. And Hurst finally says, don't you want to dress the wound? And I'm like, yeah, Doc, what are you doing? Were you hoping to just let him bleed to death? Is that what you thought you could, I don't know what the doc was thinking in that moment. But the doc goes and he hangs out with Alma and winds up explaining to her why it's important that Sophia see the body, because she keeps saying, I want to see Mr. Ellsworth. And everybody's kind of like, she shouldn't see that. She's she's a child. He got shot, But the doc says, keep in mind, her family was slaughtered. I don't know that she saw that happen. And Alma's like, well, I always assumed she ran away and because she saw it happening. And he's like, I don't think so. I think they hit her and then ran on and got overtaken. So to her, she only has everybody's word that her family's dead, but she never saw their bodies. She doesn't know what happened to them. So it's natural for her to want to see Ellsworth, to know that he's actually gone. And Alma kind of she's sort of overcome for a second and really is like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Meanwhile, we have Seth coming in from Sturgis, and he goes straight over to Alma. It's a very tense situation to me because everybody knows that the two of them have this history. And now that Ellsworth has been taken out of the equation, the kind of safety that they all had with Seth being married, Alma being married, and everybody having their place in the world, has been upset. And I'm worried that him comforting her and being with her is going to really be a problem for Martha. I don't feel like Martha is going to make trouble, like loudly, because she is such a compassionate person that I can totally see her being like, this woman just lost her husband, of course, go do what you can. But there is propriety, there is a line, and I have to think that Seth has got to be more conscious of that and be more respectful. I'm hoping, because as much as I want him and Alma to be together because they are good together, Martha is also good. And I like him and her together as well. And I want Alma to have somebody on her side, but it doesn't have to be Seth. Oh, excuse me. Excuse me. So yeah, the whole way that like everybody's sort of like side-eyeing the two of them and walking on eggshells around them. It really is a little bit, I don't know. There's something about it that feels like the beginning of a whole other bit of drama that nobody needs right now. And I'm hoping they both realize that nobody needs it. Like, let's just not. I'm trying to see if there's a lot more that I wanted to talk about this, because there's a scene where Cy Tolliver is going amongst his whores and just like berating them, I guess, because he's like jealous kind of the fact that Trixie just went and shot Hearst. Like, he seems to be sort of impressed by that. Then there's the scene where all of the usual dudes are drinking in the gym, but hanging out with Charlie Utter, who doesn't normally hang out there. And they're all like getting along with him. And there's something really cute about it. I like Charlie Utter so much that him fitting in with these guys, even though they're murderers and, generally like not reputable folk, I really enjoy how much they are taking him under their wing in a way. And that Charlie is being receptive to that fact and recognizing we are all on the same side now. We can't be worried about all this stuff in the past. And Al is like theorizing with Jack about what to do, and says that, Jack could kill Hearst while he's adjusting his back. I'm thinking, of course, Hearst is not going to let you anywhere near him. But Jack brings up a different point, which is he's got shareholders. 10,000 would rise to replace him. Which, I mean, maybe, but they're not like him necessarily. I don't know. Just seems like extra terrible that we've got that to deal with. But I don't feel like they're going to be as outright cruel, like sociopathic, maybe even psychopathic. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about that. And then we have the meeting between Wu and Al, in which Al tells Wu to bring his men in. And Al is basically like, dude, it has been 10 fucking days since I got those guys over here. How could you have waited this long? Are you serious? And Al is like, I know, I'm sorry, but now is the time. Can you please go get them? And that is basically where the episode wraps. So, excuse me. I made it through the episode before I coughed almost the whole thing. So I'm calling that a win. All right, guys. Well, thank you all so. I can't believe the next episode's the final one of the season. I'm dying. Thank you very much, Patrick, for commissioning these. This show is really good. I cannot wait to find out what the movie has in store. I've heard there might be more than one. I don't know if you've heard that or if they're just releasing them one at a time or what. But yeah, if you got any info on that, let me know. And I hope you guys are enjoying the coverage, and I'll be seeing you soon with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
was an Unspoiled Network podcast.